Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This happened sometime last year when I was assigned to pick up a man from the Air Force Base at Lim Chu Kang Camp 2. It was just past 8 p.m, but in this remote area, it was already pitch dark. The camp is surrounded by nothing but green grassland and, of course, the old Choa Chu Kang Cemetery, just across the road from the base. When I arrived at the pickup point, there was no one in sight, so I called my passenger. Surprisingly, he asked me to drive across the road and into the cemetery. He explained he was a gravedigger at the end of his shift. He said he would be waiting for me by the cemetery office, so I did as he instructed. I reached the location and sure enough, the man, an older Malay gentleman, was waiting outside. I helped him load his digging equipment onto the trunk of my car. As we drove through the cemetery, heading back toward the main road, he talked about his work. I asked him what would make anyone want to be a gravedigger, and his answer surprised me. He said that since he was young, he had always been able to see wandering spirits all around, and that he took up this job to help them find their way home. Suddenly, he asked me to stop. There was urgency in his voice. We were on a narrow road with nowhere to park, but he sounded so alarmed. I hit the brakes immediately, stopping the car in the middle of the road. There were no street lights outside, and the headlights of my car made only a few meters ahead of us visible. There was nothing but complete darkness all around us. As soon as we came to a halt, the man jumped out and opened the rear door on his side of the car. I was confused. What was he up to here, in the middle of nowhere? He started speaking in Malay, quite loudly, so loud I thought he was scolding someone. I turned around, trying to understand what was going on, but I couldn't see anything or anyone, except the old gravedigger shouting at the emptiness. Then, and just as suddenly, he closed the rear door and hopped back into the car. He told me we could go. I asked him what had just happened, and what he told me left my hair standing.
When you picked me up there, I wasn't the only one who got in. I didn't notice at first, but when I did, I asked you to stop, and I opened the door so she could leave. This cemetery, this is where she belongs.
I could barely speak for the rest of the trip. After I dropped him off, I drove straight home. I barely drive nights anymore, but when I do, I'm still reluctant to look in the rearview mirror.
This was a Driver Spooky Story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
I had been driving nights for a few months now, and on the night this happened, I was in the Bukit Timah area when I got an order from Kampung Cantik to I forgot where, but I remember the booking showed a lady's name. The Kampung Cantik road is a very narrow lane, bordered on one side by houses and the other by forest. But as you drive up the hill, and especially after the PIE underpass, the houses give way to more and more trees. And soon, a green and dark wall is all that surrounds you. As I was about to reach the head of the Kampung trail, just a few meters before reaching, the passenger cancels the order. So I stop. And as there was nobody around, I make a 3-point turn to head back the way I came. As I was driving back down the hill, I suddenly felt a cold chill all over my body. I heard a very dim beep in my ears and lost my hearing completely for a quick second. I looked at my rear view mirror and saw what looked like a faint white smoke on the path behind me. I shook my head and brushed it off as nothing more than just fog, which is normal in these parts. Coming out from Kampung Cantik, I get 2 more bookings and go about my work as usual. But as I was dropping the second passenger off around Commonwealth Station, I get a third order from the same lady at the same location in Kampung Cantik. I declined the order straight away. I turned the app off and drove home. On the next day, as I walked out of my house to take my 5-year-old daughter to school, she suddenly stopped. I tried to pull her towards the car, but she wouldn't budge. Pointing at the vehicle, she turned to me in a frightened whisper.
Papa, who is the woman in the car? Why she keeps looking at you like that?
This goes on for about 3 days. My daughter became too afraid to leave the house, seeing the same vision over and over. A woman in the back seat of my car, glaring back at me. And every time she repeated that, I'll feel goosebumps all over my body. So I decided to call a ghost expert and explain to him what was happening and when it had started. He came over to the house, looked around, and recited a few incantations. Then, he simply turned to me and said, "Tonight, you go back to the same location on Kampung Cantik. Open your window or door for a while and then drive off." So I did what the man said. Since then, my daughter hasn't seen a thing. And even though I never once saw the ghost of the lady who haunted me, the description my daughter whispered in my ears that very first day has never left my mind.
This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
The night had been uneventful. Like most nights, the sky was covered, but through the gaps in the clouds you could see the full moon beaming down on the city. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and I had already been driving for a few hours when I heard the ping on my phone. The booking showed a passenger who wanted to go from Geylang to the old Chua Chu Kang cemetery. It was a strange destination, but back then I didn't think much of it. To be honest, I was more excited about the high fare that awaited me a welcome reward at this late hour. I reached the pickup point at Geylang Lorong 23, and since the passenger wasn't there, I parked along the roadside to wait. About 5 minutes went by before she appeared. A lady with long, silky black hair, wearing a long white dress, entered my car and sat right behind me. I couldn't take a good look at her, as the road wasn't well lit and dark tufts of her hair covered parts of her face. But it didn't matter. It was just another passenger on just another ride. That's what I thought. It was a good 30-minute drive to the cemetery. At first, I tried to engage in polite conversation, but she didn't utter a single word. I understood that she didn't want to be bothered, so I just focused on the road instead. But what I did find very odd was that I didn't hear a single noise from her. Not a word, not a movement, not even a breath. When we were about to reach the cemetery, she finally spoke, instructing me to take a right onto the dead-end street where she claimed she'd be getting down. So I did as I was told. I drove down the narrow lane for a while, when suddenly I passed by a dead-end sign just like the one from the entrance. That's strange, I thought, but kept going for a few more minutes before once again the same dead-end sign came into sight. And I passed on by and I kept driving. Something wasn't right. I kept driving past the same sign over and over again, but the road never came to an end. I looked at the rearview mirror and I could only see darkness. A sense of despair started to take over me, and as I kept on driving, I struggled to keep my thoughts in check. But when at the edge of what my headlights could illuminate, the same dead-end sign crept up towards the car once again. I immediately stopped and turned to ask the woman where exactly I was supposed to drop her off. When I turned around, to my horror, there was no one behind me. The lady was gone, and when I turned back, I realized I am exactly where I started, by the main road, the dead-end sign facing me, defiant. For a short second, it seemed to me the word end looked a bit faded, making the word dead stand out. I shook the thought away, reversed the car immediately, and drove off as fast as I could, and as far as I could from anywhere close to that forsaken cemetery.
This was a driver's spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This is the story of a late night booking I received a couple of years ago. It happened just after midnight. I heard the ping and looked at my phone. The pickup point signaled one of those old colonial houses in the Changi area where the dense vegetation cover road signs and the house numbers aren't so visible. The passenger's destination was on the other side of the island, the cemetery in Choa Chu Kang. I thought this was one of those lucky bookings, a long trip with a high fare. What could go wrong? The booking was accompanied by a message to look out for an old lady dressed in white. Apparently, her son had made the booking on behalf of his aged mother. It was a sweet gesture. Without mulling for too long why an old lady would need to go through the cemetery at this late hour, I drove to the pickup area. I followed the GPS and reached the supposed location, but there was no one in sight. Many of the houses in this area are numbered, so I kept on driving, hoping I'd find my passenger a few meters ahead. Although the streets were poorly lit, with very few lampposts along the road, my headlights eventually beamed onto a person, and I could vividly see the old lady waiting for me further ahead. I stopped the car on the curbside. The lady opened the door and boarded. After confirming her final destination, I drove off. We didn't talk throughout the trip. It was a long but uneventful one. And when we reached the destination, the columbarium on Chinese Cemetery Path 4, there was a man already waiting for her outside. He opened the door to help the old lady out, and with a low, almost guttural voice, thanked me for sending his mother to him. I smiled back and wished them a good night. Just as they had vanished into the building, the most sinister event in my life took place. As I was about to end the trip, I received an angry message from the son who made the booking, asking me where I was as his mother had been waiting by the roadside in front of the colonial house for a very long time. I was confused. Was he joking? I replied saying I had picked up his mother in front of house number 4. To my horror, the passenger replied that could not be the case, as that particular house had been deserted for over 10 years. A cold chill ran through my spine. Who had I just dropped off? What was I doing here at this ungodly hour? I quickly messaged back, apologizing, and went on to complete the road trip, free of charge. I drove home right after I was done, to clear my mind and get some sleep. But even today, many years later, I still revisit that journey in my dreams.
This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories. This happened just a few weeks back, on a Wednesday afternoon at about 5 p.m. It was one of those gloomy days when light rains drizzled around the city. I got a booking to pick up a passenger from the CBD area heading back to Koven. I arrived at the pickup point and saw the passenger, a young man waving back at me. I stopped and opened the door. He got in, I greeted him, and we drove off. As I was turning into Robinson Road on my way north, I turned my body to check for incoming traffic, when I noticed a girl with long hair wearing a blue shirt seated next to the boy. I couldn't see her face clearly. She was looking down and her hair covered part of her face. I was quite puzzled as I'd only seen one passenger board my car. But I just brushed it off, thinking I just hadn't paid attention. When the traffic cleared, I proceeded on. But as I kept on driving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked into the rearview mirror, and the girl wasn't there anymore. There was only the boy on his phone. That's when the temperature in the car started to fall. The aircon was set to 25 degrees, but I felt colder and colder. Despite being scared, my curiosity got the better of me. The next time I stopped at the red light, I took my phone out, turned on my camera, flipped it to selfie mode, and to my horror, the camera detected my face and a presence on the empty seat right behind me. Feeling goosebumps all over my body, I kept on driving as the destination was not much further ahead. Upon reaching, the boy alighted, closing the door behind him. But the temperature in the car didn't change. It was freezing cold inside, and I took that meant the ghost of the girl was still in there with me. With all the courage I could muster, I took a deep breath, took a gamble, and said, "Excuse me, your boyfriend has just alighted. Please, I need you to get out too." For a few seconds, nothing seemed to change. But then gradually, I felt the warmth return. Knowing that the ghost was gone from my car, I drove to a car wash and then went to the temple to pray. For me, for her, and for the boy who doesn't know he's followed everywhere he goes by the ghost of his dead girlfriend. This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This happened to me a few months back. It was just after midnight and I had been driving for a few hours. I was on River Valley Road, just passing by Fort Canning Park, when a new booking appeared on the app. The pickup was nearby at Orchard Central Shopping Mall. The app indicated the passenger was a woman. I reached the pickup point and saw a lady on the bench waiting. She looked a lot like the passenger in the photo, but after we made eye contact, she didn't make a move, turning back to her phone instead. So I figured she wasn't my rider. I was really tired, so I leaned back and waited, zoning out for a second. I was stirred by the car door opening and closing. I turned to look but only saw the same lady on the bench outside, but now making her way towards my car. How strange, I thought. I hadn't unlocked the car, so how could the door have been opened? The lady approached the car and I finally unlocked the door for her to enter. She slid in saying,
"Hi, sorry, I hadn't noticed the previous passenger had just left."
"Passenger? I didn't have a passenger," I answered. And to this day, I never forgotten her reply.
There was a lady in a white dress, seated right behind you. She was with you when you arrived.
This was a Driver Spooky Story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This was about a year ago, during the post-pandemic reopening phase. Phase 2, if I'm not wrong. I was driving until pretty late, trying to make up for all those lost months. I had just dropped off a passenger at the Civil Defence Academy in Jalan Bahar and was driving back to town when I received a booking around the Jalan Bahar area again. So I made a U-turn and drove back into the Ulunas.
The area is pretty remote, and the closest HDB is a good 10 minutes drive. So it was very curious to get another booking there, especially this late. I reached the pickup point before the passenger, and there wasn't a living soul in sight. So I turned my hazard lights on and waited. Suddenly, I heard a knock on one of my rear windows. Instinctively, I unlocked the door, thinking it was the passenger who had arrived. But a couple of seconds went by, and no one came in. I looked at the rear view and side mirrors, scanning the surroundings for movement. But I didn't see anyone. I didn't think much of it. Just ignored it, to be honest, thinking I might have misheard something. So I locked the door again and waited. Not even 10 seconds went by before I heard another knock on the same window. This time, I turned around to see if there's anyone there. But once again, there was no one in sight. At this point, I'm starting to get really spooked. So I tried calling the passenger, but to no avail. I messaged the passenger to check his whereabouts. Unfortunately, he replied saying he was just reaching. That's when I heard the third knock. I turned around to check and almost screamed. A black shadow loomed over the back window, looking in. The figure sprinted around the car, and before it reached over to my side, I stepped on the gas and got the hell out of the location, cancelling the job and speeding off home. I don't know if I actually left my passenger behind or not. I don't even know if I had a real booking. But no matter what, I wasn't going to wait for anyone while that thing was still out there.
This was a driver spooky story by GoCheck. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with GoCheck. GoCheck drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This incident happened to me during the Hungry Ghost Festival last year. I had always avoided driving at night in this month, but I was hit hard by the pandemic the year before and I was still trying to make ends meet. So there I was, driving late at night, when I got a booking from a passenger nearby, by Ang Mo Kio MRT. I went to the pickup point and the mother and her daughter got in. Throughout the journey, the daughter was very lively. She chatted away with no one in particular, like she was talking to an imaginary friend. Her mom didn't pay much attention to her antics, so I didn't bother either. It did just look like normal child behavior, lost in her own imagination, daydreaming. Her chit-chat continued until we reached the destination, a landed house in Bedok. By then, I had all but forgotten she was even talking. I stopped the car on the curbside in front of the gate, and the little girl started to wave goodbye to an imaginary friend.
Goodbye.
Out of curiosity and deciding to finally give into her play, I asked her who she was waving to. With the sweetest of giggles, she pointed to the empty passenger seat next to mine and replied, "To her. To your daughter." Her mother and I looked at each other stunned. I immediately headed home carrying an uneasy, eerie feeling along the entire way. The passenger seat to my right was completely empty, but still I avoided looking at it. And though nothing out of the ordinary happened to me that day, any other day since, my apartment did feel a lot colder than usual that night.
This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
This happened a few years ago. I had started my shift early that night, and I was making my way back home, driving up McPherson Road, when I got a booking from a man at the old Mount Vernon Sanctuary, this funeral complex that was shut down at the end of 2018. It was almost 3 a.m, and I considered whether I should take this one or just go home and wrap up for the day. But in truth, I hate to cancel, so I decided to take it. The sanctuary was located at the top of Mount Vernon, and the road up the hill had no street lighting. I was surrounded by nothing but darkness. So I drove slowly, making my way up toward the crematorium. Finally, I saw a few lights further ahead, and as I approached, I realized they were the lights of a funeral taking place at the location. My passenger was already outside, waiting for me. He entered my car, and I drove around the roundabout to make my way back down the hill. I had just turned full circle, when a bit further ahead, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the street. I slowed down, cautiously approaching the person. And when my headlights illuminated him, his face was completely distorted. It was nearly impossible to discern any facial traits in the gruesome mess, except for this wicked grin where his mouth used to be. I freaked out. I started to reverse, going against the flow of traffic just to get out of there. But my rider quickly reacted, insisting I go the right way. And I realized in shock that my rider couldn't see the disfigured man right in front of us. I turned to face straight again, and the apparition was still there. I did my best to calm down. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to buy time, hoping the ghost would vanish. I turned to my passenger again and asked him whether the funeral he was attending was for a man or a woman. He said, "It was the funeral of a man, a very dear friend who left us too early. He'll be greatly missed." The minute he finished speaking, I turned to look ahead again, and the apparition was gone. As I grappled with the horrifying encounter I had experienced, a kind, bright thought dawned on me, that the figure on the road was actually the ghost of the friend my passenger had lost, and who had appeared tonight to take one last look at his friend. And that in hearing these kind, loving words, he had finally been able to depart in peace. But despite carrying this positive thought in my mind, I couldn't help but keep looking at my rear view mirror throughout the rest of the night, until the sun finally dawned.
This was a Driver Spooky Story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
I remember this event like it happened yesterday. It took place during the 7th Chinese lunar month, the ghost month. The year was 2020, and because of the pandemic, business was really bad. I usually drive mornings and evenings, taking office workers all around the island. But due to the pandemic and the lockdown, everyone was working from home. So, in order to earn a living, I started driving longer hours, and my work would take me deep into the night. At that time, my daughter worked at the Marina Barrage, and knowing that area was under heavy renovation, I was worried about her safety, especially on days she worked late. So I would often end my shift dropping by her workplace and give her a ride home. On the day this event took place, I had tried my luck on the road for a little while before heading over to pick up my daughter. I was much earlier than usual, so I parked my car along Marina Grove, a road that is no longer in use. I decided to rest in the car, waiting for my daughter to call me. The place was quiet and peaceful. Knowing that she'll take an hour, I leaned back on my seat and closed my eyes for a while. I was startled by a knock on the window. Looking up, I saw my daughter smiling back at me. It felt good to see her, but something about it didn't feel quite right. How had she known to find me here? Why did she finish work so soon? And it was quite a distance from here to the barrage. Had she walked all the way, all alone? Although it felt strange, I opened the door to my car and she happily hopped in. I'd asked her, "How come you finished work so early today?" She replied,
Yeah, my boss very nice. He let us go home first.
I said, "So good ah? How you find me?" Daughter laughing.
I saw your car lah.
The conversation and her body language rose no suspicion in me. I shook the odd thoughts off my mind and drove us home. During our journey, we talked like we normally did. Nothing fell out of place. Until something happened. Halfway home, my phone rang. Clicking on my earpiece, a familiar voice came through.
Papa, where are you? Are you coming?
At that moment, a cold shiver ran down my spine. With all the courage I had, I slowly turned to glance over. But there was no one sitting beside me. My daughter, or whoever I had been talking to, had just vanished. I turned back to look ahead, and in a flash, I see that the car in front of me had stopped. I stepped on the brakes with all my force. My heart was racing so fast. I could hear it pounding in my chest. My breath hitched. I gasped for air. It was such a close miss. As I panted for air, my daughter's voice rescued me from my trance.
Papa, is everything okay?
I replied to her saying I was a little bit behind, before making a U-turn to drive back to the barrage. Until this day, I haven't told my daughter or anyone what happened that night. And in my dreams, every so often, that near miss still haunts me. But not as much as that ghastly double of my daughter knocking on my window.
This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
I remember this happened a while ago. A Thursday night, if I'm not mistaken. I was coming from Bukit Batok, heading to pick up a passenger at Rifle Range Road. A badly lit road surrounded by dense jungle at the base of the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. The only source of light in this area was coming from my car. and I could only see but a few meters ahead. I followed the GPS towards the destination, a condo, driving deeper and deeper into the forest. But the further I drove, the less houses I saw, until there were no more residences around, only the dreary jungle and utter, desolate darkness. Realizing I wasn't going anywhere, I decided to park the car and call the passenger. But the moment I reached for the phone, the trip was cancelled. Suddenly, a strange, sweet fragrance crept up from I don't know where, and an eerie sensation took over. I decided to get out of there immediately. I had just made a U-turn when something huge landed on the roof of my car and began to scratch it. Slowly, the sound was unbearable, like someone scraping a chalkboard. I could not see what was doing it, but its sharp nails clawed above with force and intent. If I had remained there, the thing would have completely lacerated the roof off, and I would have probably been next. Panicking, I stepped on the gas and bolted out of there. Adrenaline rushed through my veins, and only when I reached the main road, I realized I was clenching my teeth so hard my jaw was hurting. Soaked in sweat and utter horror, I went home straight. I might have escaped the claws of whatever beast I bumped into on Rifle Range Road, but I couldn't escape the consequences of the encounter. On the next day, my back hurt terribly, and I woke up with a high fever. Well, at least I kept my head.
This was a driver spooky story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek. Gojek drivers have been around. They've seen things they can't unsee and had scary experiences they can't forget. So listen carefully and listen safely. This is Driver Spooky Stories.
So it was a pretty regular, uneventful week until this happened. I was already at the end of my day shift and ready to head home when I got a booking from KK Hospital. I got to the pickup point and saw a mother and her two kids, a boy and a little girl, waiting for me. As I exited the complex onto Bukit Timah Road, I looked at the rear-view mirror to check on my passengers. The sickly complexion of the little girl caught my attention. She looked white as a ghost and had deep dark circles around her eyes. There was a fierceness in the way she looked back at me, observant. Still, I couldn't help but feel bad for the little one and wanted to share my sympathies. I turned to the little brother and asked, "Hey, is your sister okay?" I watched as horror took over the little boy's face. His mouth and his eyes slowly opening wider and wider and wider. The mother, shocked, slowly pulled him closer to her, saying, "There's just two of us."
This was a Driver Spooky Story by Gojek. Listen to the other ones if you dare. And don't forget, this Halloween, avoid road scares. Ride safely with Gojek.